The laundromat smelled faintly of detergent and damp cotton. I was perched on a plastic chair, my jeans slightly stiff from yesterday's wash, scrolling aimlessly through my phone. The usual hum of dryers felt like white noise until the bell over the door jingled. She came in quietly, holding a worn leather bag. Mid-40s, I guessed, maybe 45. Hair pulled back loosely, eyes that didn't need makeup to look alive. She nodded at me with a small, almost apologetic smile, like she wasn't sure if she belonged there. But she did. I glanced up from my phone. Hey, I said, voice softer than intended. Hi, she said. Her tone was gentle, not rushed, not performative, just present. She carried a sense of quiet somewhere between habit and resignation. She settled 2 machines down from me, careful with the coins, deliberate with the soap. I noticed the faint tremor in her hands when she shook the powder into the tray, and my chest tensed without reason. I wanted to say something, anything, but the words felt heavy. Instead, I folded a napkin I had taken from the vending machine, creasing it sharply in the rhythm of my nervousness. You're here a lot, huh? I managed finally. She looked up, and our eyes met for a fraction too long. Her gaze wasn't searching, just registering. Yeah, she said, shrugging. I like routine. I nodded, pretending that was enough conversation. My thumb flicked over the screen, scrolling past unsent texts I'd written to no one, deleted, rewritten. Messages that started with, "Hey, I thought of you," but never sent. Small habits, little silences I couldn't explain, and yet they weighed. She glanced at me again while retrieving a stray sock from the floor. "You're folding laundry like it's origami," she remarked, a hint of dry amusement in her voice. I laughed awkwardly. I like order." "Order," she echoed, soft, almost testing the word. Then, without pressing, she moved to her machine. I noticed her shoulders relax once the soap dissolved in water. Small sigh she tried to hide. It struck me how rarely someone let themselves be small, unguarded, unremarkable. Minutes passed. Silence, punctuated only by the hum of dryers and the occasional clink of quarters. I caught myself watching her hands, the way her fingers lingered on the edges of her bag, the subtle shift as she checked the dryer. A quiet attentiveness, a presence I hadn't realized I'd missed. She paused, looking toward the window where the sun angled across the linoleum. "Do you usually sit here alone?" she asked softly, not pressing, just noticing. I shrugged, folding the napkin once more. "Yeah, mostly. Helps me think." Her smile didn't widen, didn't fade completely either. It stayed, a quiet acknowledgement. "Sometimes thinking is overrated," she said. We didn't speak for the next 5 minutes. She leaned slightly against the machine, a gentle tilt of her head that didn't need words. And somehow that small shift, the tilt, the weight, the quiet resignation of her posture, pulled at something in me I hadn't known was raw. Then, just as I was about to leave, her phone buzzed. She looked down, reading something that made her eyes soften, and without thinking, she rested her head lightly on my shoulder. Not in a rush, not dramatic, just quietly, as if she belonged there for a second no one else could touch. I froze, hands halfway to my pocket, the napkin still folded in my lap. And in that silence, the dryer hummed like a heartbeat. She pulled back, almost immediately, blinking. "Sorry," she murmured. Then, after a pause, a faint smile. Maybe I'll see you tomorrow." I nodded, heart racing, not sure if it was hope or guilt, or something unnameable. Her goodbye lingered in the air, and I found myself staring at the corner where she disappeared, wondering if ordinary afternoons could suddenly become something I'd remember forever. The next afternoon, she was sitting on the small balcony of her apartment, a steaming mug of tea in her hands. I had knocked once, then twice, before she finally opened the door, hair a little loose, eyes still carrying the quiet weight from yesterday. "Thought you might need help with that," I said, holding up a laundry basket. She gestured me inside without a word. The apartment smelled faintly of vanilla and old books. She set her mug down on the kitchen counter, the steam curling between us. Do you always do laundry like this? I asked, trying to fill the silence. She glanced at me, lips pressed together, then smiled faintly. No, not always. It's easier when you don't have anyone asking why your clothes smell like lavender soap. I nodded, folding a t-shirt, catching the way her eyes lingered on my hands. I get that. Sometimes it's nice to just be unnoticed. Unnoticed? She repeated softly, as if tasting the word. I know that feeling. Her gaze drifted to a corner of the room where a framed photo rested. Her and a man, smiling years ago. She didn't explain. The silence carried the story. I noticed how the slight curl of her fingers betrayed a memory she wasn't sharing aloud. I imagined her life beyond these quiet moments. A divorce, empty rooms, the weight of routines that kept her steady. My own doubts nudged at me. Was I imagining more than there was? Was the comfort of her presence just my loneliness echoing back at me? We moved in tandem around the small space, folding, sorting, stacking. Every glance, every almost brush of hands felt amplified. When she laughed softly at a joke I hadn't really intended to be funny, I realized how small gestures had started to mean more. Do you ever miss someone? I asked, hesitant. The words sounded stranger than I intended, clumsy against the quiet hum of the city below. Her hand paused mid-fold. All the time, she said. Even when I try not to. She looked at me then, really looked, and I felt the weight of years between us. 45 to 22, experiences I couldn't share, regrets she might never speak. I caught myself imagining what it would be like to reach out, to brush her hair back, to tell her what I felt. The thought stopped me, a warning in my chest, and yet my hand lingered near hers longer than necessary. She noticed, I think. She didn't move, didn't pull back, just let the moment settle like dust in a sunbeam. Then, without speaking, she nudged the mug toward me, brushing my fingers lightly. Careful, it's hot, she said. Her touch was brief, accidental seeming, but it carried more than the warning. A softness, an acknowledgement, a small, unspoken permission. I set the mug down, palms warm, heart louder than it should be. Later, when I walked home, I kept seeing the tilt of her head, the quiet weight in her eyes, the way she'd rested into small routines. I didn't know why that moment stayed with me. Maybe because it felt like someone finally saw me. The following evening, I found her on the balcony again, this time with a half-open book and a mug that smelled faintly of chamomile. I lingered at the door, unsure if I was welcome, holding the laundry basket I hadn't finished sorting. Hey, I said finally. My voice cracked a little. Hey, she replied, not looking up at first. When she did, her eyes softened, but there was a flicker, something like caution. I stepped inside anyway. She didn't protest, but the air shifted, heavy with something neither of us named. We folded clothes side by side. My fingers brushed hers once, lightly. She didn't pull away immediately. Instead, she stiffened, then continued folding, slower, deliberate. I could feel the tiny pulse of hesitation. Do you want tea? I asked. No, I'm fine, she said, eyes on the mug in her hands. Her tone was polite, but distant. I watched her, the way her shoulders shifted, how she tucked a strand of hair behind her ear, like she was trying to keep control of herself. I wanted to reach out to tell her it was okay, that I wasn't going anywhere. But my own hesitation stopped me. A knock at the door startled us both. She flinched. I froze. It's just my neighbor, she muttered. I nodded, pretending nothing mattered. I could feel it then, the fragile thread between us. Something intimate, almost dangerous, hovering just out of reach. My chest tightened with both desire and the knowledge that this shouldn't happen. We returned to folding. Silence settled, punctuated only by the soft rustle of fabric. I imagined leaning in, letting my forehead brush hers, feeling the weight of her breath. My hand itched to reach for hers again, but I didn't. Her eyes flicked toward mine. For a moment, it felt like the world shrank to the space between us. Careful, she said softly, and I realized her warning wasn't about the folded laundry. I swallowed. My mouth wanted to move, say something, anything, but words failed. The air felt taut, ready to snap. A laugh, a cough, a step from the hallway could break the spell. And maybe that was exactly what held us there, frozen, hovering in a space where almost everything was forbidden. Her hand moved subtly closer to mine, then stopped. Her gaze dropped, then lifted, catching mine again. I wanted to reach, to bridge that gap, to let the tension dissolve into something inevitable. And then, almost, I leaned in. Her eyes widened slightly. She inhaled softly. My heart thumped loud enough to echo in the quiet room. The knock on the door repeated, louder this time. Reality pressed in. She stepped back, hand lightly brushing mine as if apologizing without words. I stayed still, feeling the warmth linger, the almost touch vibrating in my chest long after she turned away. I left shortly after, walking home with my hands in my pockets, mind racing. The moment stayed suspended, like a question without an answer. A door left slightly ajar. It was nearly sunset when I saw her walking toward the small park near our building. I'd finished my shift early, hoping for a quiet moment, but my chest tightened when I realized she wasn't alone. A younger man, maybe her son's age or a friend, walked beside her, laughing at something I couldn't hear. I waited by the bench, trying to calm the sudden spike of something sharp in my stomach. When they passed, she caught sight of me and smiled, hesitant, apologetic. Her eyes flicked to the other man, then back to me, and I felt the pull of jealousy I hadn't expected. She sat down beside me, careful not to touch, but the space between us felt charged. Her bag rested on her lap. Her hands fidgeted with the strap. I tried to find something to say that wouldn't betray how unsettled I felt. "Long day?" I asked. My voice was uneven, betraying me. "Yeah," she murmured. A pause. Busy with everything." Her words trailed off. I watched her, noticing the little lines around her eyes, the way her shoulders hunched just slightly. She was always measured, always careful, but there was something fragile about her today. I don't know why I get so distracted," I said finally, words tumbling out like pebbles. "When you're around." She blinked at me, startled, but not in anger. More in surprise, as if she hadn't expected honesty. A long pause stretched between us. "I'm not supposed to feel this," I added softer. "I know it's complicated." Her lips pressed together. She looked down at her hands, twisting the strap of her bag. "You don't have to." "I know," I said, cutting myself off. I wasn't sure if I wanted her to stop me or let me keep talking. I don't want to lie about it either." She lifted her eyes to meet mine. That quiet weight, years of things unsaid, things I couldn't touch, was in her gaze. I could see the conflict, the restraint, and maybe the hint of curiosity she didn't dare act on. The park around us had emptied. The sunset painted the pavement gold. She shifted slightly, inching closer without really moving. I could feel the warmth from her arm, even across the small gap. You shouldn't," she whispered finally, almost to herself. "I know," I said again. My throat was tight. My hands itched to reach for her, but I stayed still, letting the tension build. Her gaze dropped, then returned to me. "Do you ever think about what could happen if we didn't stop ourselves?" I swallowed. The question hung in the air like a spark over dry grass. My chest tightened. I wanted to answer, to confess everything I hadn't said, but the words stuck somewhere between my throat and my heart. We sat like that for a long moment. No one spoke. The sky darkened. Shadows stretched. And then she tilted her head slightly toward me as if asking, but not quite, the one question that she didn't answer my texts the next morning. Not the first one, not the second. I kept staring at the little bubbles that never turned blue, the phone screen that felt heavier than it should. By afternoon, I decided to stop knocking. I lingered at the door for a moment, hand hovering, then pulled back. She hadn't mentioned leaving, hadn't said she'd be busy, just absence. When I saw her later, she was in the courtyard, watering a small patch of plants near the mailbox. Her posture was stiff, precise. No glance toward me. No smile. The warmth that had made the last few days feel possible seemed to have folded into itself. "Hey!" I called softly. She looked up, startled, but didn't move closer. She wiped her hands on her apron, her movements tight, rehearsed. "Hey!" she replied finally, voice clipped casual. Not harsh, just distant. We walked in silence for a while, the usual path around the block. I noticed the tension in her shoulders, the way she avoided my eyes. A memory flickered. A conversation, a laugh, a moment when she had leaned closer than anyone else ever had. And now it was gone. "Everything okay?" I asked, careful. She shook her head slightly, then paused. I have things. Responsibilities. Complications. I didn't tell you before." Her gaze dropped. I followed it, but couldn't see anything specific. Just the shadow of something unspoken. I imagined what she meant. A child, a divorce final, someone else in her life, or just the emotional baggage we all carry, tucked into corners we rarely expose. My chest tightened, and my hands itched to reach out, but I didn't. We passed a bench. I wanted to sit, to force conversation, to bridge the distance, but she kept walking. I matched her pace, hesitant, trying not to push. She finally stopped near the gate and turned briefly, eyes almost apologetic. I should figure things out. Alone." I nodded, even though my mind spun. "Yeah, I get it." Her smile was thin, polite, the kind you give when you mean well but can't actually stay. She didn't say more. She just walked away. I watched her retreating figure until it was swallowed by the shadows. That night, I stared at my phone. A message drafted, never sent. "I can wait. I'll be here." The words felt inadequate, almost desperate, but I couldn't press send. Something about it would break the fragile pause we were in. I left my apartment window cracked open, hoping for a sound of her footsteps on the street below. Nothing. Just the faint hum of the city. I didn't feel heartbroken. I felt paused, like life forgot to finish the sentence. The next morning, the seat by the balcony where she always sat was empty. Her mug still rested on the ledge, a thin ring of steam-stained ceramic, untouched. I ran my fingers over it, feeling the warmth she had left behind. And that was it. The space between us, once humming with possibility, had folded into something unnameable. A quiet tension I couldn't resolve. Would change everything. I found her in the kitchen that evening, the apartment smelling faintly of coffee and bread. She was leaning against the counter, sleeves rolled up, staring out the window at the fading light. I hesitated in the doorway, unsure if I should interrupt the silence that had grown between us these last days. "Hi," I said softly. She turned, eyes widening slightly, then relaxing. "Hi," she replied. Not warmth exactly, more acknowledgement. I shifted from foot to foot. I missed this. You. Just this." My hands fidgeted with the hem of my shirt. She didn't answer. She just watched me, the tilt of her head and the slight bite of her lip betraying the tension she'd held in check. I felt a flicker of panic, a fear that I'd said too much, or not enough. "I shouldn't," I started, then stopped. The words weren't right. They never were. She stepped closer, not fully, but close enough that the space between us felt both inviting and dangerous. Her hand brushed against the edge of mine as she rearranged the mugs on the counter. That tiny, almost accidental contact made my chest tighten. "I don't want to complicate things," she said finally, quiet but deliberate. "But I don't want to pretend this isn't happening." My throat tightened. "Neither do I admitted, voice low. The words weren't dramatic. They didn't need to be. They were just true. We stood like that for a moment, two people aware of the distance yet drawn to the same fragile line. I imagined leaning in, speaking everything I hadn't said, but the moment demanded restraint. She was testing me and I was testing myself. Her gaze softened. She paused, swallowed, and then exhaled slowly. "I don't know what's next." I nodded. That was all I needed to hear. We didn't have answers. We didn't have plans. But the acknowledgement itself, honest, unadorned, was enough. I reached out slowly, my hand brushing hers. Not a grab, not a demand, just a connection. She didn't pull away. She let her fingers rest lightly against mine. A quiet affirmation that we were both here, willing to be present, if only for this moment. A small smile flickered on her lips, almost shy, almost hesitant. I returned it. The world outside the window continued in its usual rhythm, but inside the kitchen, there was a pause, a moment of fragile clarity. "Okay," she said softly, voice barely above the hum of the fridge. "Okay," I echoed, and that was it. No declarations, no grand gestures. Just a hand, a smile, and the acknowledgement that what we'd been dancing around for weeks now existed openly, quietly, between us. I realized then that sometimes the most powerful moments weren't about changing everything. They were about letting someone see you, fully, even if only for a moment. We didn't speak after that. We didn't need to. The silence itself felt like agreement, fragile but enough.